We have done our audience survey here, and I was actually quite amazed because most of the people here are do not deny, say that there might be or they don't know. And this is Mr. Budd Hopkins, who has been researching the subject for quite some time. This is his second book. It's called Intruders, The Incredible Visitations at Copley Woods. His first book was called Missing Time, and you're working on a third book. When Mr. Hopkins is not working on books, he's actually an artist, and quite a well-known artist, because he has works in the Guggenheim Museum, and one must be of a certain high-level strata to end up in the Guggenheim. So how does one go from doing wooden sculptures in the Guggenheim to writing books about UFOs and visitations and aliens?
Well, Dini, actually, I began, and still am, essentially an artist, and I had no interest in the UFO subject at all. And I had a daytime sighting of a UFO 25 years ago. Over Cape Cod that lasted about 3 minutes, along with 2 other people, and that gets your attention.
What did you see?
We saw a small, circular, grayish disc which hovered and flew very quickly away from us. We saw it from a distance from the side. We more or less saw underneath it that it was completely circular, no details. We tried to explain it every way we could, and then finally, as I was slowing down and we were looking at it, it suddenly shot across the road behind us very fast, and we jumped out.
All right, for most of us who think about UFOs and aliens, that we have a concept in our mind that people have either seen what you have seen or they have been taken on a spaceship and they've had an encounter.
Right.
But what happens in your first book, Missing Time, and the people you are about to meet is quite a different experience, and it is something that you discovered through a tremendous amount of research and interviews, in which hypnosis was used. In
many cases, hypnosis is used. I began looking into this very seriously in 1976, and I had no preconceptions about what we were going to run into, just investigating the UFO phenomenon. The abduction idea, as you mentioned, that people were familiar with was the Betty and Barney Hill case, where this couple was picked up once,
right, as
far as anybody knew. As I began to look into sightings, I began to find pieces of missing time where the person could not account for the whole sequence of events. In other words, they would see a UFO coming towards their car, say, and say the car would stop. And then they would say, I don't remember what happened next. All of a sudden, the car started up and the UFO was gone.
And it's now...
they lost a couple of hours.
Right.
Yes, exactly. So we began looking into this, using hypnosis in a number of cases to retrieve what had been forgotten. But we began to find out that that was not the only time that that particular incident had occurred to someone. And we began to discover that these events actually dated back to people's childhood. And what emerged was a pattern which was replicated over and over again by different investigators in different parts of the world, that an abductee is first picked up as a child, as if he or she is some kind of tagged animal in an ongoing study. And that person is then re-abducted over months and years and so forth. Samples are taken from the body. There are very often very deep incisions made, which are painless most of the time in the person's body, which leaves a certain pattern of scars, which we've run into over and over again. But it's as if that person, and then very often that person's offspring, are the subject of an ongoing study, which, of course, pointed to the idea that genetics were involved here, a genetic curiosity.
In the first book, Missing Time, you documented 7 cases. There are 7 people who came forward with these missing time stories. Turns out throughout their lives there had been many abductions. What happened after that? The letters started to pour in.
The letters are still pouring in. I must have received 300 letters in the past 6 weeks, 5 weeks, something like that. I put at the end of the book the request that anybody who felt they had some kind of experience like this should write to me, care of the publisher. And what I began to find out was that something that seemed to me originally very rare as an experience is quite widespread. There are a lot of people watching us this minute who have had these experiences.
I was just thinking that, you know, somewhere in this country there's somebody sitting there on the edge of their seat saying, wait a minute, I'm not sure if I want to hear the rest of this show. Let us take the skeptic's view. Could these people not be having a similar hallucination? I mean, we know that people who are schizophrenics have very similar hallucinations. They hear voices, they see these things. Could these people, could we rationalize it in saying, well, there are several hundred people who are having a similar hallucination?
Right. Whenever I run into a new case, I have 3 options. That the person is lying to me, made it up, or that there is something, just as you've said, some kind of psychological problem, or the person is telling the truth. And hoaxes are very, very rare. But the psychological area is one we have to look into very carefully. Now, I have immediately, when I began looking at these cases in 1976, I began working with psychiatrists and psychologists who were professionals. And right now, I have a network of people who have been working along the same direction I have around the country and looking into these cases, who are very, very adept at being able to discern whether this is a hallucination or whatnot.
There are certain people. We have a gentleman, Dr.Gotlieb, with us who talks about and works with people under hypnosis, people who are called wannabes because they want to have this experience. However, there comes a point where they make that differentiation. I didn't say that word right, did I? They differentiate between these. Also, now, these people have had implants. Apparently get these implants, and some of them have been removed or they have fallen out, or some woman apparently sneezed one out. But we don't have one. Why don't we have one that you can...
Well, I certainly wish we did have one, but that's a very complicated subject unto itself. These things do not turn up through X-rays. They do not easily turn up with CAT scans, but they have turned up on MRIs.
What's an MRI?
That's a magnetic resonant imaging. It's a new process hospitals are using in conjunction with CAT scans to locate any kind of, let's say, anomaly in a particular part of the body. But the thing is that where they seem to be placed is up here, near the optic nerve, or sometimes they're put in through the ear.
What do we assume these are for? I mean, when you refer to tagged animals, is this so we can keep track of these people? Is that what we think? We
honestly don't know what they're for. That's certainly one of the theories. It could be a locator. It could be some kind of transmitter of information, or it could be some device for implanting information. We don't know, or something else that we don't even haven't even encountered yet. Yes.
Okay. Now, for those of us who are skeptics and don't want to believe this, there is a whole side to this thing, which is why I was talking to one of the producers of this show, and I said to Barb, you simply refuse to believe this. And the only condition under which she would believe it is if it happened to her. But in refusing to believe it, that segment of society that does, is that refusal in part based on fear?
Well, of course, it depends on the person. I certainly think fear has a lot to do with it. But also, the human mind just wants to say no to certain unthinkable subjects. And I mentioned in my book that a horrible example of saying no to evidence, refusing to look into something, was, of course, the Holocaust in Europe. That even when very knowledgeable people received information about it, about the Nazi genocide in the early 40s, people simply said, no, I can't believe it.
The human mind, there are some things the human mind will not accept. I cannot accept that it is so wrong. So the concept of alien life form for a lot of us is just, I refuse to accept that.
Yes. You see,
because if it's true, I mean, things start to tumble for a lot of us.
The world would change drastically. And it's a kind of upsetting idea to imagine if this idea were being officially promulgated by a government. That's why, even though I always talk against the idea of government cover-up, in the long run, it's not, when one considers the alternatives, the government announcing, okay, this is true, it's going on, they're here, and we don't know what it's going to mean. We have no power to fight back. We don't know what's going on. Now, it does not seem to be evil. I want to make that point very clear.
No, it's just I mean, I put this question to you. You and I are running the country. We are the government here. We have one of these things. I mean, let's just say we have this crap. Are you going to go on television and show this to people? Would you cause the chaos? Would you cause whatever it would cause? Because we don't know what would happen to people.
No government wants to admit its impotence. And if a government would have to say they can fly around, they can do all these things, they can outfly anything we have and take anybody at will that they wish, and yet they haven't really talked to us. We don't know whether they're ultimately going to be friendly or what. No government could really make that announcement.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, I would like you to meet a woman who has been through this experience, who has been abducted throughout her life. She's about to use her real name. For the first time, she's about to come out and say, because she's decided she doesn't have to hide behind this anymore, and she's not here to sell you something, and if you don't want to believe her, you don't have to believe her. This is simply her story. Come back in just a moment. We spoke earlier about Budd's book. This is it. It is called Intruders. In it, it chronicles his meticulous investigation of one alien abduction case in particular. And here is a brief synopsis of that case. It all began with this photograph. After the publication of his first book on UFO research called Missing, Budd received this picture from Kathie Davis of Indianapolis. Kathie claimed that the circle and strip of dead grass had appeared in her yard after she had seen a UFO in the area, and she wondered if the damage had been caused by a UFO taking off and landing. Oddly, she also mentioned that both she and her mother had similar scars, and neither of them could remember the causes. Her curiosity opened a floodgate of revelations. Under hypnosis, Kathie recalled not just the terrifying events of the night she mentioned, which culminated with her abduction, but several other close encounters that had occurred throughout her life. At the age of 7, she had apparently become an unwilling participant in a long-term genetic experiment. Kathie remembered none of this consciously. Hypnosis revealed that a sample of flesh had been removed from her leg during that first abduction by an alien creature she described as having a large head with huge black eyes. Now, if Kathie were the only person describing these encounters, one would be inclined, as she did herself, to doubt her sanity. But these drawings have been done by dozens of different people from various locations claiming similar experiences. Now, over the course of many hypnotic sessions, the purpose of these abductions became clear. Kathie had an ova removed from her body and was eventually shown a hybrid child, apparently part human, part alien. She was told that she was the mother, but could not keep the child. Obviously, this revelation, whether real or imagined, was devastating to Kathie. She has never publicly told her story before because of the ridicule that it would cause. In fact, Budd used a pseudonym for her in his book. Now she has agreed to talk and to use her real name. Meet Debbie Tomey, the real Kathie Davis. Welcome. I want to tell you something, and I told you this story earlier, and I will say this publicly. I used to fly a helicopter for a living. I used to spend a lot of time about 2,000 feet off the ground. It occurred to me one day that, gee, you know, I'm up here. I've probably got a really good chance of seeing a UFO. And I started to look for them. And I was 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours at night, and I would look through the skies. And suddenly one day I realized, wait a minute, if I see this thing, and I go on the radio, and I tell everybody, they're going to think I'm crazy. And I'm going to have to go through my life trying to defend this. And I don't want that. And I consciously stopped looking. And I have to tell you, Debbie, that I admire your courage, and I've spoken with you, and I think it takes a tremendous amount of courage to come out and do what you're doing. And I know this is your first appearance, and you've decided that you're going to use your own name, and you're going to come out, and you're going to deal with this. And you tell me that you made this decision a little while ago when you were at a conference in the U.S. somewhere.
Yes, when I was first asked to be on the conference and talk, I didn't want to do it. And after I thought about it for a while, I just felt like I had to do it. I had to do it because I knew there were a lot of people out there that had experienced things and had had memories of things they didn't understand and felt uncomfortable with them. And I knew that the other people who had talked to me about it and shared their stuff with me helped me to feel better about a lot of things, so I thought I could help somebody else. And then I thought, what good is it going to do me if I hide behind this name?
Right. And it's basically, you said it's their problem. This is your story. You don't have to believe this. You're not here to sell anything. It's just your story.
That's right.
Now, when we were talking about this, you still, and you've been through a lot, you refer to these as dreams. You still, in your own mind, fight with this experience.
There are some parts of it I don't have any problem with. It's very easy for me to say, yes, I believe that there's got to be some other kind of life somewhere else, and I know what I've seen and what my mother and I saw together. Nobody can tell me I didn't see it. They weren't there, and I know what I saw. If you don't believe me, that's your too
problem.
bad.
Right.
But there are things that I do have problems believing, accepting.
What do you have problems with? The hardest part for you is?
Well, the hardest part for me is when I got pregnant. Because when I got pregnant, I assumed that I got pregnant by the man that I was going to marry. And I still think I did. I don't, it's just a tug of war inside of me. And I was just like any other woman that got pregnant and then lost a baby. It hurt all the same, But the circumstances under which I lost it were unusual, to say the least. And That's why I kept it to myself for 7 years after. My mother knew that I had been pregnant and then wasn't pregnant.
So you're pregnant, you're suddenly not pregnant, and what happened to this child was, at least your dream recall is, that you were abducted and the child was taken from you.
The day that I woke up, and the first thing that came to my mind when I woke up that morning was, I'm not pregnant.
This is after an abduction experience, a dream experience. Like,
Well, yeah. I'm not pregnant. And then I got up and went to the restroom, and there was a little bit of spotting. But I still continued to say I wasn't pregnant. I also felt that I had a baby girl. And
in a subsequent abduction, when you went through one of these dream experiences, you were shown a child. And this child you recognized, but it's part human and it's part not human.
It didn't look real good.
How old would this child have been when you saw her?
About 3 or 4.
Dini, one thing is that this is, of course, the most difficult thing for Debbie or anybody else to talk about who's been through these experiences. I mean, you can talk easily about other sides of it, but obviously this goes to the heart of one's feelings. But this has happened to a number of other people, and I'm dealing now with dozens of similar cases. Recently, a woman who's married to a doctor who was pregnant and went through 3 months of pregnancy, and there was a heartbeat on the ultrasound of the embryo, the fetus, and so forth. And then one morning, she had a normal period, and there was suddenly no more.
No fetus.
No fetus. She went in, and they did a D&C and sent everything to pathology, and there was absolutely no fetal tissue. And the doctors simply did not know what to do about this. Now, this happens to be the wife of a doctor, and she's been bereft, although she does not want to accept. She has asked me to tell her that this didn't have anything to do with her other extensive UFO experiences.
As a woman, understand, Debbie, I mean, women understand. I mean, you turn the story, I'm thinking of my son or my daughter, and one understands as a woman the tremendous loss that is implied here. But this experience in your family is not only you. Your mom went through this, you went through this, your older sister went through this, you read this man's first book, you write to this man, and I'm putting myself in your position because I know that I would be saying to myself, Dini, you're crazy. You just got to forget this because there's something gone a little wrong. You don't want to tell anybody because maybe you're just coming apart internally, right? So we'll keep this real quiet?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it was reading his book that gave you that little step forward.
Well, actually, it wasn't reading his book. It was the last episode, or whatever you want to call it, that left a mark in the yard. I had to live with looking at that thing every day. And when I did, every time I did, I'd remember things. A lot of the things that I remember, I didn't need hypnosis to remember. Things that go way back till I was really little.
Okay, your abduction started at what age? Your dreams started at what age of being abducted?
The first time I went to Detroit and I was missing all day and they couldn't find me, I was, I think, like between 6 and 7.
And how many times has this happened to you now up to present time? How many experiences have there been?
6 or 7.
Probably a few more than that, actually.
Okay, now you don't know whether or not this is going to happen to you again. I mean, you sit here now, and you don't know. You have to live with this, that this dream may come back again.
Yep.
This is not a comfortable thing to have to live with, Debbie. I mean, I keep trying to put myself in your shoes, and this would, what do you do for reassurance? How do you keep it together, Debbie? How do you just keep going here?
Well, I'm sitting here. I got all my arms and legs. I'm alive,
And that's okay.
Also, when we put people together with other people in a support group who have been through these experiences, and a person can sit there in a room full of people who all seem normal and happy, relatively speaking, you feel better about yourself, you have less self-doubt, and I think that Debbie's certainly been a wonderful addition to a support group that we have in New York, and I think that's been rich, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and I'm lucky because it involved my entire family, half of the neighborhood we lived in. I mean, it wasn't just me.
Oh, okay, yeah. That would help a lot if it was...
It really helps a lot that my family has seen it, all the strange stuff and everything. So.
Just one last quick question, because, as I smile when I think about this. Okay, so Debbie meets this wonderful man, and you married this man subsequently, right? And he doesn't know anything about it.
Sure, he knew everything about it.
Well, but when did you, there was a time at which he didn't know, and you had to say, listen, honey, there's just something I think you ought to know about me.
Well, when I met
And I
him,
would really like to have seen his face, Debbie.
he already knew me and loved me just for what I was, and and knew that I wasn't a liar or a cheat. So when I told him my fears and what things that were happening as we were going together, he just accepted it. He was supportive of me.
You're a lucky woman. I know you do a lot of work with families and the problems that are attendant, and we'll talk about that, because just imagine that this has happened to you. You wake up, you want to talk to somebody, and you say to the man or woman beside you, honey, guess what happened to me last night? If you were that husband or wife, what would you do? We're back in a moment. The term actually refers to one of 5 different types of alien encounters. According to ufologists, the first type is a sighting of a UFO within 500 feet. An encounter of the second kind is physical evidence, such as a burn mark on the ground after a UFO sighting. Actually seeing an extraterrestrial is the third kind. Our guests have experienced a close encounter of the fourth kind, alien abduction. And the fifth kind is a matter of speculation, the retrieval of a crashed UFO by the military. Debbie is from Indianapolis, but Dorothy is from Huntsville, now living very close to Toronto in Unionville, but from Huntsville, Ontario, up north in a farm, is where she was born and raised. And your problem started when you were 8 years old, with the incident of your first abduction. And it's happened to you throughout your life. Your most recent abduction was how long ago?
Actually, in January, I was taken for what I consider a training session. It just they sort of take me out of the house, and it seems to be a group session. There's about 30 people, and all I remember is this teaching session, as I say, and then they bring me back home.
Unlike most people who are abducted, you remember most of it. Seems to me, Bud, that the pattern is, let's establish the pattern, that most people have this missing time experience. They don't remember. They're sort of told not to remember. And then so they retrieve a lot of this under hypnosis, correct?
Yeah, correct. But there probably 25% of the cases people remember a great deal about their abduction.
Thus enters Dorothy.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. And I recall reading in this, it says that the first time you left, you were told that you wouldn't remember, and you were furious because you could remember.
Yes, I think it's just an effort of will, yours against theirs, that you do remember. I was really annoyed that they thought they could control me. They'd already controlled me to the point where I couldn't move, and I was really very mad at this time, and I thought that if I chose to, I would, and I did.
Did you go through this experience, and I go back to thinking that, okay, that's it, I've lost it, I'm crazy. I mean, this is not happening, I'm making it up?
No, the only thing I've found that you try to put it in a dream sequence, mainly because it happens at night. You're taken out of your bed, you have your experience, you're taken back, and you go to bed, or you go to sleep almost immediately. You don't sit there and worry. And when you wake up in the morning, your first idea is, boy, I can put that in a dream. That's
what a
good.
Dream that was, right?
Yeah. And you spend the next 6 months telling yourself that's what it is, and eventually get to the point where your honesty with yourself, that you admit that this really was an experience. But you have to argue with yourself.
Yeah, I bet you do. Bud, you were thinking.
I was just going to say that I have cases where 7 people have been taken at once, or 6 people, or 5 people, or 4 people, whatever, and in many cases with 2 people at once. So it's not something that just happens to a single person.
Yeah,
and their
it's not something
recollections are the
you
same.
can fight. I mean, if they want you to come, you go. I mean, it's not like you say, no, excuse me, I don't want to go tonight.
No.
I mean, this is beyond question. It's like a hypnosis. Is that how we could?
Well, I would say something like that, but certainly they have the ability to control your behavior. And this is one of the things that, of course, is most upsetting to the people who have the experiences. They don't ask your permission. They don't explain what this is about. They don't really give you any kind of rights whatsoever, even though they're not hurting people in a deliberate way.
This has happened to you how many times over your life now, Dorothy? To date, we have how many experiences here?
About 9, actually, all told.
Why? Why you? Why do they need you? What do they want you for? What are the training sessions about?
I don't have a great recall of the training sessions. they seem to be teaching something that I'm going to have to know within, say, 10 years. It's a, I don't know how to explain it. They said, I don't have the recall of that, just going out and coming in and being in the room and being taught. And it's very important. You know, I mean, this is a major thing that they're doing. I mean, you get the impression that this is earth-shattering.
So to speak.
So to speak.
There's one of them, you have a name that you recognize one, his name or her name. Its name is Doka?
Daka.
Daka.
Yes.
You communicate with Daka?
He seems to be the one that's there every time. He's
Is he nice? Is he kind? Are you afraid of him?
No, he seems to be sort of paternal, kindly, and he's the one that seems to do all the dealings with me, you know, that the others are with him, but he's the main cheese.
You had an implant.
Yes.
It came out accidentally. What happened?
What happened with it, or what happened?
How did it come? Did you sneeze, or?
Yeah, I had a really bad cold, and I've been sneezing for days, and it came out right there.
But I mean, didn't you go, oh, this is it, the proof? I could take this?
No, I looked at it, and you know, that's a very odd-looking thing. It was. I think if it had been the silver it went in, it would have triggered something, but it was calcified. It was kind of a yellowy brown, like you would get in hard water. And you could still see the little knobs, you know, from the original shape. And, you know, I looked at it for a while, and I thought, it has to be important, and I wrapped it up in a tissue, and I put it in a little crystal dish that I have in my bedroom. You know, I keep all these tiny little things that I don't want to get lost. And sometime later I went to look for it, and it was no longer there.
Essentially, I think that Dorothy did not really have any conscious recollection of what it was. I mean, out came this odd object, and on some very deep level, she knew it was important, but she really did not have a conscious recall of an implant.
No, it didn't trigger at that time.
Yeah, it's a later recollection.
I think when I went to look for it the next time, I realized what I was looking for, you know, all of a sudden, that's what that is, you know.
Right. One of the interesting things is you were told at one point, and I forget how long it was, that you were going to be, if some things would happen in the future. You were told you would be on a show called Man Alive, which you were on.
Yes.
You're also told that you would be, and you knew you would be on the show with me.
Dini Petty Show, yes.
On the Dini Petty Show.
Yes,
You know what's happening to people across this country now, and I know what's happening. They're sitting there and they're looking at you people going,
uh-oh.
They don't look crazy. They're making too much sense. You do not fit what people have created as what the abductee is going to be like.
No.
And it's really upsetting people because you don't fit this little mold. We have another person we would like you to meet in a moment. Come back and join us. If we have somebody who has one of these stories, how do we kind of unearth the truth? How do we try to distinguish the people, as Mr. Gotlieb, Dr. Gotlieb calls them, the wannabes, from the people who are telling the truth? And you use hypnosis?
Partly.
Partly, and how do you just, first tell us what a wannabe is.
Well, a wannabe, in common parlance, I suppose, is somebody who relates a conviction that they've had such an experience, but we can find another explanation for it. Which doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't have an experience. It just means that there is another compelling diagnosis that's likely.
Now, you've dealt with a lot of people who have had abduction experiences, and you have discovered, and I should state that you are skeptical about this.
I try to maintain my professional detachment about it.
Right.
And still try to do a good job.
So there are people that you can eliminate as wannabes, people that have some psychological problems, people that whatever, but then there's a core group left.
The real issue is about the core group of people who are not psychotic, who don't have a definable mental disorder, and who relate this story and the symptoms of going through a stressful experience. But we can discern no earthly stressful experience that they've been through. And there's no analog for that in medical literature. There's a clearly defined post-traumatic stress disorder, but we don't see the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder without a trauma.
So where does that leave you after all this? I mean, it's not a wannabe, this person is not schizophrenic, they're not eliminate all. Now I got this core group. What does your, I mean, what do you say to yourself?
Every time I meet one of these people, I find going through myself two currents. The first current says, oh, because it challenges all my preconceptions. And the second current that goes through is, they've come to me for assistance. They're in as much trouble dealing with it as I am trying to understand what's going on. And it's my job to be able to assist them the best way I know how. And that's what we try to do.
You know, the thing that comes through, because when you started this, I don't know if people realize this, but you always think of abduction as a one-time thing, and it happens to people, and they tell the silly story, and then it's over. Now we're into another area here. This is, and I remember reading your book, Bud, and at the end of my book, I thought, don't let this happen to me. This is not fun. This is not, you walk away with this is a terrible experience for some poor human being. One, to have to go through. Two, to have to deal with themselves. And three, to have to stand up and talk to the world about it.
Dini, I've collected symbols that people have remembered, that made drawings of symbols that they have seen inside the craft. It could be a notational symbols, letters, numbers, or whatnot. That's some sort of alien language, quote unquote, that are virtually identical from case to case to case. People who don't know one another, they've never been published. And I've had twice when somebody would, after a hypnotic session, draw the symbols that they have seen, and then I have shown them the other symbols afterwards, which confirm exactly the accuracy of what they drew. I've had two people burst into tears because they did not want this to be so true. People want this at arm's length. It's a very distressing thing to have to deal with in one's life.
This happened to you, Debbie. We can show Debbie's drawing and the other drawing. Can you show this to us, Bud? Debbie's actually a very fine artist and did a drawing of the person that she had met, the alien that she had met. And then on the front of a magazine, you saw the other drawing. And you went upstairs, and what did you do?
Threw up.
Because you thought someone had stolen your drawing.
At first I was angry. I thought, how dare them print my drawing without asking me? I hadn't given it to anyone except Bud. And even got kind of mad at him because I figured he must have given it to somebody. But then my dad pointed out to me the signature at the bottom of the drawing, and it wasn't mine. And I didn't know this woman, and it really scared me.
Now, for those of you who are saying, oh, well, look, Dean, that's just like in the movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That's where they all got that picture from. Not so fast. They did get it from that movie, but they used your research to make the movie.
Well, research of other people, too. At the time, there was quite a collection of drawings very similar to these that date from actually back into the late 60s and early 70s that Dr. Allen Hynek handed to Spielberg to use for his special effects. So those figures in that movie were based on accurate UFO research.
So that's why when you see the drawings, they look so much like the movie, because the movie's based on the drawings. A couple of questions here. You had a question about the shape of saucers?
Have any UFOs been sighted that don't look like the saucer that we all imagine?
Yeah, we're always showing that. Is that the standard one, Bud? Or
They come in all shapes and sizes, it would seem. We have triangular-shaped UFOs, delta wing-shaped UFOs. There have even been some rectangular shapes, a long sort of cylindrical shape, many, many different types. And what's extremely interesting is two different people, Dorothy being one of them, have described being inside a very large, quote-unquote, mothership, where there were a group of different craft parked. And both people told us the same thing, that all of the UFOs in these spaces were different, one from another.
I'll tell you something really interesting. We've been doing the show. People have... How many contacts have you had, Bud, since you started your research? How many people have come?
Well, I've worked personally with about between 250 and 260 people. Personally meaning working with them, interviewing them, investigating their cases face-to-face, doing hypnosis, etc.
Okay, now we just have this audience that people just sort of show up here, and while we were talking about this, you telling me a story in the commercial break about something that happened to you when you were 13.
Yeah, when I was about 13, 14, there's a plateau where there's a field, and there's a ravine, and it narrows out to be about a mile out. And I remember vaguely there was a UFO, I believe, a saucer shape way in the distance. It comes along, goes through the hollow, comes up, lands on the field, and I hid behind some rocks. I was coming home from the store. It was just turning dusk, and goes up, goes away. I looked for something on the ground, but couldn't find anything the next day, and I just went, oh, well, that's...
How many people have had, just sightings like that? I mean, are there thousands and thousands?
Oh, yes, hundreds of thousands of sightings. distant sightings and nighttime sightings are very, very hard to evaluate because you don't really know what people see a lot of funny things at night. I don't really investigate just sightings because there are many of them and they're hard to deal with. These cases, of course, have a lot more real information. Okay. But there have literally been thousands of abduction cases reported and investigated all around the world. I have certain details from one case of mine that occurred in the Catskill Mountains in New York, only turned up, these certain details, in a very similar case that occurred in Zimbabwe in southern Africa. Okay. So it's a global phenomenon.
We're going to take a break. We continue with more in just a moment. If you'd like more information about UFOs, there are 2 services that may be able to help you out. In Vancouver, the UFO